Hello, hello. My name is Clark Heron, aka the Harry Hobo, and welcome to episode number quattro in the series of AKA Sports. This week's topic is a topical one. The upcoming Super Bowl, not this Sunday, but the following Sunday. But before we get to the Super Bowl, the NFL was going to announce their Hall of Fame class of 2022. And today we'll be talking about all the finalists and who we think should get into the Hall of Fame. And Fletch, welcome back. I'm glad, number one, that you only have rain down where you live, because right now I'm dealing with ice and snow and all that fun jazz. So hopefully we can get the podcast in before the power goes out. Uh, so hopefully we can get that done. But in the meantime, this one is a fun topic for us both, and I think we both mentioned this off air, just because the names on this list are players that we watched, if not most of their career, all of their career. So it is going to be players that are very nostalgic for us, ones that we can really resonate with because we watched their careers, and might get us a little bit in trouble just because of trying to pick the 4 to 8 that we'll be talking about today. Might get a little tough leaving some of these names off this list.
They can
Uh,
handle it.
yeah, they can definitely handle it. Unfortunately, David Baker stepped away, so they won't be getting the knock from him anymore. Uh, but they will still be getting a knock anyways, assuming they do get in. But before we get to that list here, Fletch, let's just do a little bit of a review for those who don't are maybe not 100% sure exactly how the NFL Hall of Fame voting works. First and foremost, there is a selection committee of 48 people. Of those 48 people, each individual player has to get 39 or 80% of the vote in order to make it to the Hall of Fame. Obviously, there's a huge selection at this point. We went from a semifinalist list that was, I think you said 26 players,
Yes, sir. 26.
26 down to the 15 that we'll be talking about here today. Some of them have been on this selection of the finalists multiple times. Some of them their first time overall. Let's go ahead and get into it, Fletch. Let the people know who the finalists are for the 2022 NFL Hall of Fame.
Yes, sir. So we have 15 elite athletes here, 15 elite football players. As Clark mentioned, these guys are ones we either grew up on, know of a legend, not so much, you know, 80s, 90s. We mean early 90s, late 80s at the earliest, but all these guys played in the 90s, 2000s, very familiar names. We'll get into them pretty quickly. We'll start off with the first three. We have three new finalists this year. We got wide receiver Andre Johnson, played with the Houston Texans. We have linebacker Demarcus Ware, played with the Cowboys and the Broncos. And then we also have probably the greatest kick returner, punt returner, special teams returner player of all time in Devin Hester. Those are the three new finalists. They've been out for 5 years. It's your first year of eligibility. Crazy to believe it's been 5 years since these guys been on the field. Moving forward, we have Jared Allen, defensive end, played with the Chiefs, better known for what he did with the Vikings, also with the Bears and the Panthers as well. Willie Anderson, offensive tackle from the Bengals, 1 year with Baltimore, played with the Bengals from the mid '90s through 2007. Rondae Barber, remember him from the Tampa Bay Bucks, played DB, corner, and safety from '97 to 2012. Tony Poselli, offensive tackle, played with the Jaguars. Only had a 6 year career. Me and Clark mentioned a little bit about this off air. We'll get into this later, but was probably one of the best offensive tackles in the league during that entire time. Leroy Butler, safety from the Green Bay Packers through the 90s till 2001. Obviously, we've already mentioned Devin Hester of the Chicago Bears for the most part. Get into the rest later. Tory Holt, St. Louis Rams, part of the greatest show on turf. Andre Johnson, Houston Texans. We mentioned him before, first year as a finalist. Sam Mills. Clark, this one kind of took me back. This is what really took me back. I remember Sam Mills on Madden before players were on the cover.
Yep.
Yes, sir. Sam Mills, linebacker from the Saints for the most part, played in played with the Carolina Panthers. Um, as soon as they came into existence there in '95 and played his last few years out there. Richard Seymour, mainly with the New England Patriots, part of the three-peat with Tom Brady, or three championships, I should say, with Tom Brady. Played with the Oakland Raiders towards the end of his career. Zach Thomas, another one that takes me back, one of the best middle linebackers to ever play. Played mainly with the Dolphins, 1 year with the Cowboys. I don't even remember him with the Cowboys.
Yeah, it was
Do
just that
you?
1 year at the very end. He didn't play a whole lot. It was one of those
Was
we
this a
add
Romo
him
team?
for that one. Yeah, it had to be in Romo.
Okay. I remember him with Jason Taylor. Remember him?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. He's still on the board. We mentioned Demarcus Ware earlier. Played with the Cowboys most of his career. Super Bowl champion with the Denver Broncos, then retired right after. Reggie Wayne, Indianapolis Colts. I don't even know. We have to look that up later. Who has more yards, touchdowns from Manning than him between him and Marvin Harrison? That'd be interesting. I'm not sure what the number is on that. I don't know if you do or not. We'll get into that too.
I'll look it up while you're finishing off there.
All right, sounds good. We already mentioned well, I don't know. I'm sorry. Patrick Willis retired a little early but did have a great career from '07 to 14. And then Bryant Young, another one of those players I remember from Madden before players were on the cover, but he did play until 2007, starting in '94, all with the San Francisco 49ers. Um, Sheesh, played on some good Niners teams. Those are the 15. As Clark mentioned, you need 80% of the votes. Clark, tell the people how many votes out of the 48 you need.
You need exactly at least 39. And
39. The number was what, 38.6, correct?
correct, yes.
So, with that being said, we'll get into it a little bit here. Going to talk about each player a little bit. Um, Probably key in on a few key guys that I think we might both agree on as locks, but we'll see. Um, but let's go ahead and get started. Let's
So
see.
yeah, and just to answer your question, Marvin Harrison has clearly more, has 112 touchdowns from Peyton Manning, whereas Reggie Wayne had 67.
Okay. Okay. That makes
So it's
sense.
quite a
Makes
bit
sense.
more, especially when they were the ones setting the record at the time. They broke, I think, Montana and Rice's record uh, back on, I think it was a Thanksgiving game, I believe.
Little
Remember
history.
watching that at my family's get-together. It was either Thanksgiving or Christmas, one of the two. I think it was Thanksgiving when he broke
Okay.
that record there. But let's go ahead and get started. We're actually going to start off with the first year eligible players of Andre Johnson, Demarcus Ware, and Devin Hester. Now, I think of these three, the way you talked about them, and I think you kind of gave a little bit of away, the fact that you were putting Devin Hester as the greatest kick returner of all time, which honestly I would agree. I
Mm-hmm.
think he would be a clear of the three would be the easiest one to vote for putting in the Hall of Fame. Would you agree with that?
To be honest with you, no, I
Well,
don't. I think this is I think this class is going to be interesting. I said there may be locks. I don't know if we may have even the same 4 to 8. To be honest with you, just because of how tough this is, I went back and forth with this for a while with Devin Hester. As great as he is, I just don't see him being a first ballot Hall of Famer when your impact is only for those plays that you're actually kicked to. It's like you're not playing as much of the game, unfortunately. I don't want to downgrade special teams. However, it to me because the offense and the defense are playing multiple snaps. Multiple snaps. You're playing one snap just ever so often. And that's my reasoning for not putting him as a first ballot. I think there's other guys that I would put in front of Devin Hester, at least on this list this year. I don't mean he won't get in though.
right. Yeah, I can agree with that. I think the other thing that we might see as well with a couple other players is the fact that he played with really multiple teams, and I don't know how much that would affect the voters when they look at these players and they see they don't have a longevity career with one team or just a couple teams, something along those lines,
Good
which
point.
is why we see the first name that we'll get to after these first three would be Jared Allen, and we'll talk about him a little bit. But he played with a bunch of other teams, and he's been on this list a couple different times. He didn't get in his first year either,
Hmm.
so when I first took a look at this list, that was my only concern with Devin Hester. Beyond being more of a specialist, kind of like what we saw with in baseball, Mariano Rivera being just a closer and a reliever, even though he was voted in unanimously, it was quite a little bit different in baseball. But with
Right,
Devin
right.
Hester, I don't know how the voting goes, so I don't know if they would look at a player like him played with a bunch of different teams and never really sat for a while besides, his first 7 years with the Bears. It's tough because, just like you said, once the kicking part really got pushed out of football, I would imagine the voters are going to have issue with this. But I will say this: Devin Hester, amongst all the other kick returners, and he was kind of like one of the last few that really took over the game. He was a difference maker. He was the one that when he was on the field, people kicked away from at
Facts.
times, uh,
Absolutely.
to the point where he even took his game to try and get to the offensive side of the football because teams knew that he's such a difference maker. You got to get him the football, and we can't just leave him sit back there and kind of go away with the kicking game. But I
Right.
guess of the go ahead.
And I'm glad. I want to say I'm glad you mentioned that. I think in today's league, minus the kicking rules, I think he would be a bigger threat. But also too, I slightly blame Chicago, to be honest with you, because think about it like this: if he was actually with a team that had a great offensive coach, whether that be an OC or a head coach, I think he would have been utilized more in offense, and I think you would have a much better argument to put him in had he had an impact a little bit more often on the offensive side of the field than not. For instance, I don't want to necessarily compare him to Deion Sanders because Deion Sanders was a shutdown corner most of his career. Um, but with Deion Sanders, he was utilized on offense at random times as well, and a lot of times it paid off. So he because he's such an athlete is what I mean by that. I think if he was better using a better in an offense where he could actually perform a little bit, I think you would see a lot. I think I would make him a lock at that point because he would, you know, it would be more of just not a. I hate to say it, but special teams is more so a part. It's like a part-time thing versus how often offensive and defensive players are on the field. That's the only thing. It's like kickers and punters. Is there a first ballot kicker or punter?
To my knowledge, I don't know about first ballot, but I know there's only one punter in the Hall of Fame.
That's what I'm saying. So that's where I'm going with that. But I do agree with the fact that I think he'll still get in, just not this year.
And for those that want the trivia answer, it's Ray Guy is the only punter to be in the Hall of Fame.
Hey
Uh,
guy.
he was so good that at one point they had to check the footballs for helium because they thought he was cheating.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
yeah, he was kind of good back in the day.
That's
So I guess
ridiculous.
let's go ahead and I guess I'll ask this question then. Of the
Sure.
three first-year ballots with Andre Johnson and Demarcus Ware, do you see any one of those three getting in the first year, or do you see them having to wait at least one more?
Oh man. Demarcus Ware.
That,
I
that
think
took that
Demarcus.
took a little bit out of you there.
It did. It did. The thing is I'm looking at the list and I'm looking at defenders right now, and I see a lot of good ones. I see some that have been eligible longer that I personally think should be in. We'll get to those, and I'll put them in. So yeah, that's where I'm going. I'm going to Marcus Ware though. I like him to the point where I think he would make one of my 8 if I get that far.
Agreed. He was a phenomenal defensive player. I know that based on his resume, he's part of the 100 sack club, led the league in sacks 2 years. He
Right,
was a
right.
huge difference maker. I know towards the end of his career, he had a little bit of injuries, but who doesn't at that point? And then obviously Andre Johnson, one of the best guys, one of the best receivers of his era. Led the league in NFL, or led the NFL in receptions and receiving yards twice. But the one downside is he never had a year of double-digit touchdowns. I wouldn't have been able to tell you that. I could have swore that he had at least 1 or 2 years where he had double-digit touchdowns.
He was in a tough situation though.
Agreed. Agreed.
His
The
whole career
Texans,
almost.
yeah, he didn't have the greatest quarterbacks of all time. He had uh, David Carr at one point. Um, yeah, it wasn't the greatest. Texans really struggled in their early inception years. You can just write off the years that he played with the Colts and the Titans. That didn't really matter.
Right.
Yeah, I guess of the three, I would like to see Hester. I guess that's where my nostalgia is kind of getting me a little in trouble. But
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there's an argument for this, and I think that really there's an argument for all these guys to get in, and there's a strong argument that you have as well, I believe. But that's just, I guess, my side of the argument is not now over, you know, other guys that play down after down. But his impact is definitely. Mm, I don't think anybody has impacted the game special teams like he did.
no, they really didn't. There was a few guys that had a flash years,
Not your whole career though.
but no, Devin Hester is definitely up there. So again, it's going to lean more towards how baseball treated Martin Rivera or any type of reliever that was just a closer. Uh, so you basically have to be kind of like a Ray Guy with the punter situation, be so much better than everybody else. I would say out of all of them that were just primarily punt returners, kick returners, that sort of thing, he's got the best chance to get in either first ballot, maybe even second ballot kind of deal. Whereas many of the others that may come up and may not even be finalists at any point in their career for the Hall of Fame just don't get that because of that lack of impact that they had. Um, and especially in the newer game where kick returners are just obsolete. It's far
Yeah.
between. It's completely out of the game. But let's go ahead and move on to the first name on the list. Again, another name that has been on this list quite a bit, and I'm, or at least 1 year. Didn't get in his first year. I'm a little shocked he didn't. But it is Jared Allen, defensive end, primarily with the Vikings. He did have some early years with the Chiefs, later on with the Bears and the Panthers. Uh, this is one of the best defensive players that I remember watching. His
Hmm.
ability to affect the game was insane. I mean, there were many times that they had, whenever they're talking about the two teams playing, it was always him versus the quarterback. That doesn't happen all that often. Usually it's quarterback versus quarterback. No, it was Jared Allen versus typically Brett Favre for the most part, um, and and really Aaron Rodgers as well a little bit towards the end there. I'm a little shocked he didn't get in his first year, but
Facts.
this is the this is the one. This is where I brought up the question earlier with Devin Hester was he's played with a bunch of different teams. Does that really affect the voting to the
No,
point where it shouldn't, but would it?
it might. It might. I think you're onto something. Um, it shouldn't, but it very well may. I do appreciate longevity though. I really do. But I mainly appreciate player longevity, but I do admire team longevity as well. Like, but at the end of the day, one thing with Hester, I will say, he only did what 2 years outside of, I guess, I don't know if that's two or three, 2 or 3 years outside of the Bears though. Like, excuse me, we know him for the Bears. Whereas Jared Allen, I think you're right. He's not known for just one team, and I think that's where his situation it gets more dicey than Hester. I don't think they're gonna look at that and be like, no, you're, you know, this negatively affects you. But with Jared Allen, I agree with you. I think some voters, I mean, there's 48 different opinions. Me and you just have two. So I think me and you are on the same page where it shouldn't. But some of those 48, though, we know for a fact are going to have a problem with that.
Right, and I just brought up his stats here real quick because I was unsure exactly what he did in his years in Kansas City. You look at it. First 4 years in the league, 9 sacks, 11 sacks, 7.5, 15.5, which led the league that year, his last year in Kansas City. Before moving on to Minnesota, then he had 14.5, 14.5, 11, 22, which he won Defensive Player of the Year. Then 12 and 11.5 before moving on to Chicago. Led the league in sacks twice, four-time All-Pro. Again, this is of all the names on this list. This is easily for me the biggest surprise as to why you didn't get in first ballot. Everybody else, you have something else you could say, you know what, something along those lines. Maybe somebody else was just a little bit better, or the longevity wasn't there, or your name just kind of got pushed to the background, even though you were great. It was just, you're playing for a bad team, and we'll get to those players. There's several on this list, but yeah, I'm shocked. I'm shocked. So I guess this would be the first name I would have as going into the Hall of Fame this year. For you, Fletch, is this a yay or a nay?
This is an absolute yes. Let me tell you why. Is JJ Watt a Hall of Famer?
He will likely be. I don't know about first ballot based on his injury career, but he's definitely Hall of Fame.
If JJ Watt is Hall of Fame, Jared Allen's Hall of Fame. Jared Allen was JJ Watt before JJ Watt. To me, JJ Watt had a long enough stretch in his career before the injuries where he's 5 years, he's in. Jared Allen's the same way for me. I'm like you. I looked at I just pulled up last year's class. I'm honestly upset. I mean, they put in. Let me just make sure. Alan Faneca, fine with that. Calvin Johnson, completely fine with that. John Lynch probably should have been in, fine with that. Peyton Manning, Drew Pearson, Charles Woodson. That's one, two, three, four, five, six. We just said eight. Now, what's not on this list are of these 15 finalists that are players, and I'm assuming because maybe there's just no coach or contributor to put in, but the eight that were put in last year were the six that I named, plus coach Tom Flores, and then contributor Bill Nunn, who I don't know. I'm not going to knock him, but I don't know who the hell that is. If we're just going with players, I think eight players should go if you have that many players. In this case, Jared Allen going last year would have just been seven players. Take out this contributor or just put him in as a ninth. It's a contributor. I don't care. Who do tell me someone who does. So Jared Allen got snubbed last year. Jared Allen should be a lock this year.
Agreed. And Bill Nunn, just for those, he was a sports writer, newspaper editor, and American football scout for the Steelers. Uh,
Cool story.
so,
Put him in. Just
mm,
don't take a player out to
what
put
I
him in.
agreed. I would say I like the way the one thing I do like about baseball is they have their Hall of Fame list, and then they have the senior writers that put in names similar to like Bill Nunn or Drew Pearson, that sort of thing. But that's a different time frame. They don't take up a spot. So,
Shouldn't.
granted, we did read just before we started this podcast. There is no set number. There's no by rule. You have to put in this many or exclude this many. It's just based on what we read. They said basically the ground rules is at least four up to eight is what they're currently working with, but there's no set of rules. So they could easily put Jared Allen in last year,
Exactly.
pretty easily. But let's go ahead and move on. We got several more names to go to. Willie Anderson, offensive tackle mainly for the Cincinnati Bengals. I remember the name. Obviously, when we're looking down this list of offensive tackles, we're actually let's go ahead and throw in Tony Poselli in there as well. He's the other offensive tackle that's in here. To me, even though Poselli played shorter of a career, he was the name that I remember more than Willie Anderson. Uh,
Facts.
he was just that much better even on a shorter career. And I guess even we said before the podcast that I couldn't have told you he only played 6 years with the Jaguars. It felt like he was there forever, kind of like a Joe Thomas type feel that yeah, you're playing for a bad team, but we know who you are because you are good. Um, whereas Willie Anderson, unfortunately, when you're going up against Boselli, if I had to pick between these two, I would lean Boselli, but it seems like it's a struggle just because of the shortness of his career. Are you getting those same type of vibes as well?
Um, Similar, yes. I would agree. Um, it looks like I mean an injury did end his career. Um, he actually would have went to the Houston Texans. I'm just reading here. That's very interesting. Nonetheless, just during his career, I think these two guys are actually on the same playing field because I do remember Willie Anderson, but I do remember Tony Baselli being the name. And I don't know if it's because Jacksonville was a new team or what exactly it was, but do feel like he was better. And then when Willie Anderson had his run, which was actually the same amount of time, but it was after Tony Baselli while he played along, at the same time as Tony Baselli, though. So it was almost like Tony Baselli was better than Willie Anderson, then Willie Anderson became better than Tony Baselli later, maybe. I don't know. But they both essentially have very similar accolades where they had basically a 4 year run where they were all pros, pro bowlers, the whole 9 yards. The
Right.
one thing that Tony Baselli does have over Willie Anderson is the all decade team, which to me, in my opinion, that should trump Willie Anderson because everything else is so similar. Um, so that's kind of where that's what I'm thinking personally. The other thing is this though, and I'm noticing one thing with this with the Hall of Fame, and it's just kind of just something I picked up on. A lot of times it doesn't necessarily depend on the numbers and the accolades. These guys also, because they're sports writers and media personalities, they're watching these games and like a lot of times things and I talk about this with basketball a lot more than anything else, but now I'm understanding that with football it's very similar as well. There's a lot of things that are not in the it's not in the box score. You can't necessarily see the guy's impact as much as you could see a skill player's impact. um Draymond Green is a great example that I use in NBA. I mean, doesn't average a lot of points, gets more assists necessarily than his position should, about the right amount of rebounds. And it's like, I mean, essentially, he's like a 10, 10, 10 guy, which is kind of weird, but his impact is so much greater than his numbers. And I think with both of these guys, it's really hard to quantify their numbers, quantify them like we can with Jared Allen with sacks, for instance, or like we can Andre Johnson. You mentioned up he doesn't have double digit touchdowns. You see what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know necessarily how to put one of these guys in over another, other than that all decade nod, knowing that they played in the same decade, just a year apart.
Agreed. And just like you said, if Tony Pozzelli was put on the all-decade team for his short career, wow. I mean, imagine if he played longer. Uh, if he would have put
Yeah,
on,
Willie Anderson just played one less year.
right. Yeah, and he got the nod. It's crazy, crazy to think that Boselli didn't play all that long, but still on the all-decade team. That's very impressive.
Mm.
Um, especially when it was the back end of the '90s. It was just, yeah, he
He's been on
was.
this list 16 years.
It has. He's been in here a long, long time, unfortunately. And again, it's got to be because of the shortened career, but got to get him in. I don't know if it's going to be this year, but
I
um,
think I'm putting him in. I think I'm putting him in. He's been a finalist for 6 years. Also, I think his time is now. I don't think he has to wait too much longer. Even if he does, he may have to wait a little bit longer. I personally would put him in.
oh, I would put him in too. But I think some of the voters might be seeing that Jacksonville Jaguars tag and saying, Didn't win a ring, but again, you would think with that all-decade team, somebody's got to see that. Come on now. Come on
Yeah.
now. Let us go ahead and move on. Let's go ahead to Leroy Butler, the great Lambeau
Mm.
Leap himself. Coming out of Green Bay, he was there his entire career, early 90s start all the way to 2001. So really wasn't in the league all that long. Um,
Mm.
but 11
11
years
years.
is a solid career. But I mean, we make fun of Barry for leaving after 10.
He was
You
first
know,
ballot though.
yeah, but Barry was quite a bit different. Leroy,
Of course.
obviously, this is, we're not going to try to compare the two. It's just an impossibility. Uh, but he was huge part of that Packers team that won in the late 90s. He was part of that all 90s decade team and a four-time All Pro as well. Uh, the
Mm.
accolades are there, but again, Poselli also is an all decade team as well, and he's not in either. Uh,
Facts.
so this one's a tough one. I don't see him getting in this year, sadly. Again, my nostalgia is really kicking into gear with all these names because I would love to see them all in because I know how
Yeah.
great they were.
Yeah, he
Uh,
was a beast.
yeah, and he's just unfortunately, even with the one ring, all decade team, four-time All Pro, it's a nah for me. Fletch, what do you got?
That's tough. I remember Leroy Butler very as I'm a Bronco fan. I'm on record with that. I became a Bronco fan, and I'll tell you the story. And this is why I remember Leroy Butler. Um, I don't even know how old I was. This is literally the first game to mind for me was the Broncos Packers Super Bowl. Right after the Packers beat the Patriots in 96. 1997. Parents going to a Super Bowl party, drop me off at grandma's house. I'm like 7. I don't want to go. I want to stay home or go with them. I'm not trying to go over there. I remember I was pouting. I was mad. I go over there, and I knew I was gonna watch the Super Bowl, but it was gonna be lame because I'm with my grandparents. But whatever. So, because they hyped it up, it was the first Super Bowl that I like witnessed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I get there, and all I hear in the car all on the way to my grandma's house is Brett Favre this, the Packers that. My mom's favorite player is Brett Favre. Period. She stopped watching football when he stopped playing. That's how serious it was. Um, yeah. So dad saying the same thing. Dad's a Browns fan. He hates John Elway with a passion. We all know why. Get into that another day. However, yeah, that was my whole MO. It's like, man, y'all not taking me to the Super Bowl party. I can't stay home. I gotta go. I'm going for the Broncos. And it's been literally that ever since. Leroy Butler was great in that game. Um, I watched the game as an adult and like that he was very good in that game. And I just remember him from years on because again, my mom, Brett Favre fan, always watching the damn Packers. Leroy Butler was a beast. And this was me watching football as a child. You know what I mean? Like after I got to witness what a couple all pros, but like obviously he played from 90 to, when was that Super Bowl? I could say 97. That means he only had one more all
Yeah,
pro year.
97.
Yeah, that means he only had one more all pro year that I remember as a kid. That's how great, you know what I'm saying? He was probably better before that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard. It's very hard. I already have two in, and we haven't even. Oh my gosh, I'm putting him. I'm putting him in. I'm putting him in. I'm putting him in three.
Wow. Okay.
I didn't think I would at first, but I just looked at it and I just remember. And I don't know if maybe I'm being nostalgic as well, but I'm just thinking if there's 8 slots, I'm putting him in.
Hey, I wouldn't. Nobody's gonna blame you for putting him in. It's just difficult because there's so many good names on this list. Of the 15, up to 8 can get in, assuming there's no other names to get added in uh, as well. But let's make this decision a little bit more tough, shall we?
Okay.
Let's go ahead and compare three wide receivers that are listed on here. We have Tory Holt from the greatest show on turf from the St. Louis Rams for a grand majority of his career. Obviously, we'll throw in Andre Johnson. We talked to him a little bit earlier on, as well as Reggie Wayne played his entire career with the Indianapolis Colts. We already said that he had 67 touchdowns with the great Peyton Manning in that offense. Uh, this one's tough because everybody, if even if you didn't watch, everybody recognizes Reggie Wayne's name because of how good he was in that offense, especially after, even with Marvin Harrison there, and then afterwards when he was the main guy. Obviously, we talked about Andre Johnson there with the Texans for the most part. Tory Holt is one of those names that, to me, phenomenal player. The stats are there. Him and Isaac Bruce and Kurt Warner, my goodness, they tore people up. It was the Achilles heel of the 49ers in the late 90s. They could not touch the Rams there in St. Louis. But unfortunately, with Tory Holt, it's one of those players. You could almost put Reggie Wayne in that scenario. The big difference being is when Marvin Harrison left, Reggie Wayne still did some good things to help build him as a clear number one, didn't have to need somebody else to be good kind of deal. Uh,
Mhm.
Torrey Holt can be good just by himself. There's no debate there. The problem is his name really never took off once Isaac Bruce left. He had some really good years, but it kind of felt to me, even watching all those years, he was always, when it came to listing the great receivers that played in that era, it always was easier to push his name further down than it was to push it up, right? It it just felt that way to me. There's always other names that when I get to them, okay, I can put them above Torrey Holt than somebody else. I loved his game. He was a phenomenal receiver. Honestly, he should have already been in the Hall of Fame with Isaac Bruce. They should have put him in both at the same time. That's how good of a receiver he was. But if it's taken this long to get him in, it feels like to me, based on my personal experience, the voters may feel the same way. It's just, okay, now we've got Reggie Wayne to compare him against. And now we have somebody else like Andre Johnson to compare him against. Like, it's a difficult one for me. Of the three, I think Reggie Wayne should be in. Of those three receivers, Fletch, what are your thoughts?
Interesting take. I actually somewhat agree with you to the point where I'm not going to put Tory Holt in. I wasn't going to. Um, I agree. There's just other guys, and the numbers are there, right? The Super Bowl is there. And there's other guys that are just simply, and this goes to the eye test. And I'm sorry, Tory Holt. I apologize. I do think you're a Hall of Famer. I just don't think this class is. You're not gonna cut it for me. I'm sorry, just not with this class. Um, it's the eye test, man. It's just he's not as like I'm not gonna compare Calvin Johnson though. Like some guys are just absolute monsters, bro. And like Andre Johnson is honestly one of them. Reggie Wayne is more athletic as well. Um, I'm gonna tell you a snub actually before I kind of go into these three. Steve Smith is a semifinalist and did not make the cut. Where do you rank Steve Smith with these other three? Is he on the same level?
See, for me, Steve Smith would be. I would have him below Andre Johnson, um, but I think he would be second on the list amongst the four, at least in my
Mm,
opinion. Uh, he was a phenomenal receiver. Obviously, with some bad Panthers teams, didn't have the greatest quarterback. Jake Delhomme, not going to
Super
see
Bowl.
his name in the Hall of Fame.
That's a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and they did get a Super Bowl, didn't quite get it done.
No,
Uh,
they
but
got there though. It takes a
right,
lot to get there. I don't want to discredit that
it's
either.
true.
Not in football, and especially you mentioned it with Jake Delhomme. It wasn't like he had, Steve. Who did they play against? Tom Brady throwing to him. It was,
Hmm.
and they lost by three, 32-29. That was one of the best Super Bowls I've ever seen. Steve Smith is a monster. Steve Smith belongs to be a finalist, and if I have to take Torrey Holt to put him in, I will. But going back to these three, it's Andre Johnson for me.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I'm just looking up Steve Smith's stats. Obviously, had a 1,100-yard season. Got hurt the following year. That was in 2004. Had the big 1,500-yard and 12 touchdown season.
He
Obviously,
was the
his
last
career
Triple
high.
Crown.
Had a monster year, 103 receptions that year. And again, this is kind of where the key factor comes in, and maybe why he wasn't a finalist. When you look at his career stats, only 1 year he had over 100 receiving, 100 receptions. Only 1 year. The rest of the time, he only hit 80 three other times. He had some big years, but it was all 70 catches, 79 catches. The yardage was there. The yardage was absolutely there. But then he only
Yeah,
had one season of double digit touchdowns. One. When the voters are looking at this, I guarantee you they're going to look at Andre Johnson and say, man, he was a beast, just like we're looking at him. But no double digit touchdown years. Steve
I get
Smith,
that.
all the yardage, a beast, just like Andre Johnson. Only one double touchdown year. That's it. Now, not taking anything away from him. There's definitely some years he had some issues with either the offense or injuries. Uh, I mean, there was one year he had 500 receiving yards, 700 yards. It definitely
Oh
went
yeah,
down. It happens. But yeah,
absolutely.
that's the problem. Then you start looking at the other players. So again, we've talked about this off air a little bit. I don't know what the voters, what their variables are, what they're choosing to use in order to who gets in and who doesn't. But if they're going to start looking at straight stats, which honestly should be a factor somewhere along the way.
It definitely is, and I guarantee that's why he's not there. It's because of those years, and also the fact that what did you say he had only one double digit touchdown year.
Correct.
Now we'll say he Cooper Cup was the triple crown, right?
Hmm.
Reception, touchdowns, yards. He was the last one, Steve Smith. So there's while there is the lull, there's the peak, and I think that's to me why he at least should have been a finalist. I would have not voted him in. Don't get me wrong. And but then it goes back to what you mentioned, Andre Johnson. The difference I think with Andre Johnson from the rest of these guys is he did it alone with a lack of quarterback play on a bad team that just became in existence. Not saying Steve Smith didn't go through the same thing, but Andre Johnson was, I think, the biggest difference maker at receiver on this list. And I
Right.
think that's where the eye test will vote Andre Johnson in again because I think that the stats are definitely a part of it, but the eye test is obviously a part of it as well. I don't know if Reggie Wayne will get in. I'm okay with if he does though, but I'm going to wait on Reggie Wayne, and I'm going to put Andre Johnson in.
And yeah, I totally fine with that. I'm just looking up Reggie Wayne stats. I mean, the the,
I think
the
they're
key.
better.
Oh, there. I mean, you have
Yeah,
plenty of stats to go off of. It's just the offense that he was a part of. I mean, he had a
exactly.
Hall of Fame quarterback to go with. So
And a Hall of
yeah,
Fame
I
receiver on the upside, and a Hall of Fame running back in the backfield.
right. Yeah, I'm totally fine with waiting with Reggie Wayne. I think he gets in this year. He probably should have got in last year. Um, but I'm fine with Andre Johnson as well. Those would be the two. And again, Tory Holt, unfortunately, as great as he was, just gets pushed back a little bit more. Sadly, shouldn't, but sadly he will.
I think he'll
Um,
get in one day.
Hopefully, I really do hope he does. He was a true great receiver there for the greatest show on turf. Let's go
We'll
ahead
say
and
he was fast. I kind of
oh
discredit
yeah,
him a little bit. He was fast though.
yes, he was the true deep threat on that offense. Isaac Bruce, if you wanted to compare him to this year's uh, receiving core, he was your third down guy, like an Anquan Bolden type player.
Mm,
He was the mover of the
Fetching guy.
sticks.
Very,
Tory Holt
very
was the one that destroyed your defense over the top.
facts. Greatest show on turf.
You're not wrong.
Should have won
Uh,
more Super Bowls. Only got one. It's all right
and
though.
one is enough. Uh, let's go ahead and move on to the Quattro grouping of the linebacker group. We have the elder statesman of the group, Sam Mills, played in
Mhm.
the early, mid to late 80s through 1994, as well as ending his career in 97 with the Panthers, started with the Saints. And we have Zach Thomas, you talked a little bit earlier about. We also have Demarcus Ware, again, the first year ballot. And then we have the great Patrick Willis that played a very short career, 7 years with the San Francisco 49ers. And we'll be getting to him shortly. But let's start off with the elder statesman, Mr. Sam Mills. I did not realize this, but he played 3 or 4 phenomenal years with the USFL. He was a 2 time champion there, and he was a 3 time All USFL selection. Uh, so it's a bad comparison, but it's almost like the Ichiro's effect. Ichiro played his first 7 years professionally in Japan before moving to the U.S. Um, Clearly, he didn't have Sam Mills did not have the impact of an Ichiro. I'm not gonna compare the two, but is there a thought that maybe he played 3 of his best years just in the wrong league? I mean,
Mm,
it might be possible. He's been on this list quite a bit. Um, he was a very good player, but I will say, of all the names on this list, I would say he would be the one name that I don't remember seeing much at all except later in his career.
the
Um,
Panthers. That's where I remember him.
that's really where I remember him most. Before that, but I think much to your point about how the NBA looks at players for the Hall of Fame, I think Sam Mills has much more of an impact off the field than he did on the field, to where I could easily see him being a Hall of Famer, kind of like how Bill Nunn got voted in, where the contribution not only on the field but off the field might get him in. I don't know if it's this year. I don't think it's this year, but uh, I could easily see it going in a year later on. What do you think?
Um, it's very hard for me to get into players I didn't really see play throughout majority of their career. Leroy Butler was one that I saw, I guess, enough of and understanding that he was probably a little bit better prior to me watching him, but realizing he was probably still the best safety in the game when I was watching him. Sam Mills, I mean, like I said, I truly don't remember him playing. I do remember the Panthers. Thank you, Madden. Like I said again, is what I mentioned it earlier, is one of those players that I just remember from the game. Um, I'm going to say no, just simply due to the fact that I don't know. I feel like the other guys, and I hate to do this. I'm not saying he's not good as the other guys, but I just think I would put other guys in front of him right now. Not saying he won't get in either, though. I'm just not 100% sure about him, and I would have to probably watch film, kind of understand it. I understand with the Saints, that was kind of the time that they did become a good team. So yeah, that I'm gonna say no, but the accolades are there. It's very impressive. I saw he was 3 time All Pro in the '90s, and this was he started in '86, so it's pretty. Not a long career, but definitely something to worth notice. Especially, would you say 3 years in the USFL? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's unfortunate he died a while back, but yeah, I don't know, man. I'm gonna just say no though.
Agreed. And let's go ahead and jump into the other two linebackers that we haven't talked about. Zach Thomas, the great Zach Thomas for the Miami Dolphins, uh, a force on that defense for years, and was truly um, kind of really the main when that defense was really good in Miami in those early years. He was phenomenal. He was truly a force. Very felt like Brian Urlacher before Brian Urlacher kind of deal. Uh,
Hmm.
Very, very good linebacker. And then the other one we'll get to is Patrick Willis, who didn't play that long, played 7 years, but of those 7 years, he was a 5 time All Pro. In the, I guess, 8 seasons he played, he was an All Pro more often than he wasn't. Very similar as to almost like a Tony Boselli kind of deal, where didn't play very long, but my goodness, when he played, he gave us his best. Winning Defensive Rookie of the Year. He should have been a first ballot guy. I don't know why he wasn't. This is actually his first year as a finalist. But obviously, it has to do with the fact that his career was short. But much like Poselli's, when you have a shortened career, but yet you have the impact that you did,
Mm-hmm.
come on now. Let's get him
Mm-hmm.
in there because he's a Hall of Famer. I don't know why. I mean, I can see why they
Especially
didn't
in
put
the
him
league
in.
we're playing in right now.
Right. I mean, eventually we're going to get to the point where these Hall of Fame discussions are going to be guys that only played 8 to 10 years. We're eventually getting to that point where the longevity is where the quarterbacks are. Everybody else is going to be like, nah, I'm good. So yeah, for me, of these four linebackers, I've got Patrick Willis in. Even though it's a short career, it was a phenomenal career in those 8 seasons. Zach Thomas is a very close second to me. Unfortunately, he was just part of a lot of bad teams. Fletch, what are your thoughts?
Zach Thomas is a Hall of Famer. Zach Thomas is part of my Hall of Fame class. Um, you kind of mentioned the Dolphins really weren't that good. Um, this is ironic. The Dolphins, I kind of we they just had back to back winning seasons for the first time since Zach Thomas' team, 2002, 2003, I believe.
Correct.
Um, we talked about guys, and we've put guys in that are like four-time All Pro. You know what I'm saying? Multiple Pro Bowls. I mean, Dwight has 11 years with the Dolphins. He was a five-time All Pro and twice on the second team. Seven Pro Bowls in 11 years. Defensive Rookie of the Year, AFC Defensive Rookie of the Year. Um, Team MVP rookie his rookie season. I don't know. I have to put him in. I truly just when I remember the Dolphins, we talked about Jason Taylor, and Jason Taylor's in the Hall of Fame, rightfully so. But Zach Thomas was just as good on that defense to me. I remember Zach Thomas. Zach Thomas was a beast, and I'm not and I understand like not putting him in right away. I kind of get that, but yeah, he's in for me. 9 years, gosh, that's how long he's been eligible. He's in for me. Patrick Willis is also in for me. I agree with you. I don't care. I mean, if you play 7 years and you were the best in the game basically for 7 years, you're a Hall of Famer. It's that simple. He was the best. He became the best in the league when the league still had Ray Lewis.
Yeah, he was being heavily compared to Ray Lewis. I mean, they both wore 52. They played similar styles.
Oh, he's
They were
influenced for sure.
destroyers of the game. And much like some of these other players that we're looking at that have longer careers, 12, 13-year careers, real nice careers, you still look at their stats and say they were dominant in 6, 7, 8 of those years, and you're like, that was a really good career.
Exactly.
That's Patrick Willis. He just cut off the bad years. That's all he did.
Yep.
Yeah, I
That's
agree with both of those. The problem with Zach Taylor is just being a bit of bad or being on a bad team. He should have been in years ago. Uh, and of course, the downside of Patrick Willis is this the shortened career. But I can easily see both of them getting in. For me, it's just Willis, but I do like how you have both of them in on your list, and it would make a great class to have two phenomenal linebackers getting in the same year.
those are probably if I have to just think about the best linebackers that I've ever seen, and it's just and I apologize if I leave somebody out because it was just very quickly. It's obviously Ray Lewis. I mean Patrick Willis, um, Brian Urlacher, Luke Kuechly, and then honestly Zach Taylor. Because Zach Taylor to me was very similar to, like we mentioned, Brian Urlacher. And then I feel like that was like the guys to me that were the best at their positions for the most part of their career. Like I know of what is this? In late Ray Lewis and then Patrick Willis and Kuechly all kind of overlapped each other, but you could honestly at those few years in their careers, I feel like they were almost interchangeable. You could almost move them on each one of their teams, and you would get literally the same impact, with the exception of the Ravens, only because of the longevity. But yeah, I just that those were the five, and I feel like the other four are Hall of Famers. I don't think Kuechly's eligible yet, but yeah, Zach Thomas would go for me.
Yeah, he's not eligible yet, but when he is, I would be shocked if he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer.
That's what I mean. So that's yeah. And Patrick Willis to me should have been as well. We know why he's not, and it's understandable. I just don't agree with it. Same as you.
Right. Especially he's been on the semifinalists this long. I understand if you don't want to give him the first ballot thing, fine. But come on now. This is
Yeah.
the first time being a finalist?
Now
Uh,
last year's class was when we went over last year's class,
true.
and and that might have been part of it, and I would have to go back and look at 2020's class just to see, but it's time.
Agreed. Especially this year, there is no one big name that's just the headliner. We don't have the Manning, we don't have the Calvin Johnson headlining. Just like, nope, yep, for sure, lock them in. All these
Yep.
have actual discussions that they're going to have on that Saturday before the Super Bowl. Let us go ahead and finish up with the last two on this list, both defensive players. One, Rondae Barber for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers his entire career, as well as Bryant Young for the 49ers, a name that I
Oh.
remember quite well in the early 90s. He won a Super Bowl in 1994, his rookie year. But both of these players have a similar issue. And that issue is if the voters are actually putting the variable of comparing them against everybody else of their era, they both have that same problem. Rondae Barber going up against the likes of Deion Sanders, Rod Woodson, and Aeneas Williams, as well as Bryant Young going up against Cortez Kennedy, John Randall, and Warren Sapp.
Mm,
It kind of gives me that Tory Holt vibes again, where if yeah, you're going to compare them against the players that they played against in similar positions of their era. You start listing off all these other players, and these are the type of names that just, it's easier to put them down than it is to move them up. I
mm,
don't like it. But when you look at Bryant Young, I mean, I'm a Niners fan. I love Bryant Young growing up. He was a part of the 90s All Decade team. He won a Super Bowl. But you're looking against Cortez Kennedy, which is a phenomenal athlete. John Randall was a monster for that Purple Eaters. And then you have Warren Sapp that clogged up the middle against Brett Favre for years. And then same thing with Rondae Barber. I honestly, to me, Rondae Barber has a better name, and I think might be a little bit easier to move up the list than Bryant Young does. Just because sometimes those defensive ends and defensive tackles, if they don't really dominate, kind of like a, I don't know, like an Aaron Donald kind of sticks out, easy to remember. You start putting him down the list, and I want to say forget about him, but obviously the voters have pushed him down the list.
mhm.
Um, what are your thoughts on both of these guys?
Um, I don't know, man. I'm kind of torn. I remember Brian Young, and I remember Brian Young being very good, and I remember him being. I mean, he was elite. There's no doubt about it. Um, I'm I completely understand what you're saying with the comparisons of who he played with that are all Hall of Famers now. Um, I don't know. I vividly remember him though being like great for a while. And I mean that he has a 13-year career. Now what I will say is again, I think all pros are important because all pro is a very particular group of people and I really like the all pro list that comes out every year. And I hate there's sometimes snubs, but and then sometimes some are just understandable and I get why, but so, there's always gonna be something you don't agree with. There's always gonna be something you don't agree with. But with Bryant Young, again, and this is just because of the criteria we've kind of, at least I have kind of been going with as well, is the All Pro nomination because it is just literally like one position to a degree. Um, Receivers, I think I think you get two. Running backs, you only get one. Quarterback, you get one. Like just an example, I think defensive line you get four essentially, but it's normally two ends and two inside guys. And because of that, I think I do want to pump the brakes on him a little bit, just like you are. Um, I'm stuck with Rondae Barber. I'll be honest with you, because Rondae Barber was great, and I don't know his position was just as competitive.
Hmm.
Rondae Barber played for a little while longer as well, though. Even though Brian Young had a long career, I mean, Rondae Barber played for 15 years, and he was always to me a problem. And one thing with corners that I think is a little more trickier with not than any other position is the fact that Dale Reeves had this issue where he didn't put. You look at his numbers, there's really no numbers. They don't want to throw the ball in that direction. How are you supposed to get deflections and interceptions when the ball never goes to that direction?
Right.
They have like next gen stats now that can kind of help us a little bit, but like, I mean, we're talking about 97 to 2012. Not going to be many times where you're throwing in his direction. You're just not going to do it. It doesn't pan out very well, enough times where you're just like, okay, I'm not throwing to that side of the field anymore. It's just that it. I think Rondae Barber was one of those guys. To me, I remember him as a shutdown corner for years. He does have the Super Bowl as well with Tampa Bay. Um, I have 6 guys in now, and he's my last guy. I'm putting him in. That's
And
my number 7. Are you a no on both of these guys?
I'm a no on Bryant Young, even though I would love to see him get in. Unfortunately, it's kind of the same thing with Tory Holt scenario. As for Rondae Barber, it's tough. He had a phenomenal career, uh, really good career. I'll go ahead and put a yes on him, but he might be of all the yeses that I have on my list, might be the hardest one to try and get in. Um,
I would agree with that.
it might be hard for the voters to get in. It's going to be a lot easier for some of the bigger names. I think the fact that his twin brother Tiki played at the same time that kind of got a little bit more uh,
Notoriety.
notoriety, yeah, just for being a running back doesn't help, but he was still a phenomenal part of that team, especially when they won the Super Bowl where they destroyed the Raiders. Uh,
Defensively.
yeah, that was a defensive win. It was not a Brad Johnson win. It was a defensive destruction of that team. Uh, but yeah, at this point, I'll keep him in, but he might be the hardest one to get in. I want to say, did I miss one player? I sure did.
Yeah.
We got one
Richard
more.
Seymour.
Good old Richard Seymour. We will finish up with him. Uh, he might be one of those other guys that. How does he not get in? I, I mean, at this point, he was a huge part of that team. A three-time All-Pro, won 2 Super Bowls with the Patriots, um, multiple Super Bowls, I guess. Made 2 Pro Bowls with the Raiders. So this was last 4 years in his career. He had 2 more Pro Bowls in him, um,
Hmm.
which is very, very good. This is an easy yes for me. I don't understand how he's not in yet. I mean, but what are your thoughts?
To keep it real with you, he's only a yes because I have one slot open, and because he played in so many huge games.
Right.
I that holds weight for me. I by the numbers, by the impact, I would probably put Brian Young over him
Okay.
as a better player. And this is where I get in trouble a little bit because I typically like to judge off being a better player if I have to judge and compare. But I understand that the most important thing, you play the game to win. You really do. And I know football is very hard to impact your team and lift them, especially if you don't play quarterback, because of there's so many positions on the field. There's so many variables. There's so much that another team can do to game plan against you versus a baseball or a basketball, or a soccer or really any other sport. Because there's just not as many players on the field. The more players on the field, the less important your position is. Point blank. Period. That's just what it is. Um, he's a yes for me because of the big games. Um, it doesn't hold as much weight in other leagues, like I mentioned, but it holds enough weight for me now. So he's in for me, a little reluctantly, to be honest with you. Um, but his impact was huge, and then the winning is involved. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes.
Perfect. Well, that is the entire list of the finalists for the 2022 NFL Hall of Fame that will be announced on the Saturday before the Super Bowl. I think that's February 12th. Fletch, remind the people, who do you have as your guesses of getting into the Hall of Fame?
Yes, sir. We have Demarcus Ware, first ballot Hall of Famer for me. We have Andre Johnson, first ballot Hall of Famer for me. Jared Allen, Patrick Willis, Rondae Barber, Richard Seymour, Zach Thomas, and Leroy Butler. Those are my 8.
Very loaded group for sure. As for me, the I only have 5 getting in. I've got Jared Allen, I've got Richard Seymour, I've got Patrick Willis, I've got Andre Johnson, and then at this point, like I stated, Rondae Barber would be my 5th. Uh,
I gotta challenge you. I gotta challenge you.
Challenge me.
Devin Hester, you talked about him. Talk to me. Where are you
Talked
at on
about it.
this? I
I
feel like I talked you out of it. How do you feel?
At this point, it's tough just because he is primarily a punt returner, kick returner. His impact is there, but we're talking about other guys like Seymour had an impact. Jared Allen was really, really good. Patrick Willis had an impact for a short career, and they've taken this long. Now, this is Devin Hester's first year. Uh, I don't know how the voters are going to be voting. My guess is they're not going to side with Devin Hester getting in this year. I don't think they're going to make him a first ballot, even though the impact that he had in the kicking game, basically the last one to be and the best one to do it, unfortunately, it's gonna be viewed very similarly to how I would assume how baseball viewed relievers. Probably not a first ballot. Definitely will get in eventually. I just don't see it being a first ballot.
Okay, fair enough. I like your 5. I think you're probably the number for sure. I think will be closer to yours than it would be for mine. I think we'll get 5 to 6 in. I think that's just kind of historic for the Hall of Fame as far as players goes. I mean, we didn't really get into any of the other coaches, contributors. I don't even. There's none on this list. I mean, that for the people at home, that's why. So we stuck with the players. Honestly, that's who we care about the most, and that's who we watch the game for. So, nonetheless, I like your 5. Obviously, I like my 8. I know it's a deep list, but I liked a lot of guys this year, and I knew this was going to be a tough class, and it's very hard for me to pull guys out. Nonetheless, man, it was I really like this doing going over the Hall of Fame. I can't wait for it to be announced. We'll kind of see how close we were, and we'll revisit that when that time comes. Clark, I got to throw something at you.
Okay.
We will have one more podcast before the Super Bowl. However, I'm not going to ask you to predict right now because there's so much time between now and then. How are you feeling about the Super Bowl in general right now, as far as just the game itself? Who right now are you feeling? Not so much you have to pick right now. You can change next week. I'm not gonna hold you to it. But what is your vibe right now?
The vibe right now for the game, it should be quite a game. We've got a phenomenal defense on the Rams side of the football, but don't be afraid of the Bengals. They can play some very good defense at times. Uh, the downside's going to be if the Bengals don't get off to a quick start. They're notorious about being a little bit of a slow starting team. If you get down to the Rams, especially if you allow Cooper Kupp to have one-on-one coverage, it's going to be much of a struggle to get back into it. But I will say this: both offenses are really, really good, and they can
Mm,
score in many, many different ways. That is a truth at that point. The biggest question is going to be, can the Bengals get pressure on Matthew Stafford to the point where they can affect him and that offense and get them out of rhythm? It took the Bengals a little while to get going against the Chiefs, uh, against the Rams and that defense. Depending on what the Rams do, it could be an issue for them. But I'm suspecting this game to be a very good game. And like you said, we'll actually do our picks next week prior to the Super Bowl.
Facts.
But I am very excited for it. I would love to see my Niners get in because of that defensive pass rush that we have. Couldn't quite get it done. But I am still very excited for the Bengals to get back to the Super Bowl for the first time since 1988 and the Rams to get back for the first time in 3 years. So we will see if the Bengals can win their first Super Bowl or if the Rams will win another since the greatest show on turf.
Hmm.
Fletch, it has been great. I really enjoyed this podcast as well. A lot of nostalgia, talking about a lot of players that we watched over the years. Uh, Next week, we'll be talking about a different subject. We haven't quite figured that out yet, but stay tuned. And if you want to continue to listen, simply go to anchor.fm/aka sports or check us out on facebook.com/aka sports FB. We also have Twitter among various other platforms as well. Fletch, anything else before we sign off for the day?
No, man, I'm just kind of geeked about the Super Bowl, to be honest with you. I can't wait for it. So I hate it's always 2 weeks away. But nonetheless, um, for those at home, I will say this to leave you with. Right now, while we're in this lull, enjoy some college basketball. Please do. It's been an amazing season. And Clark, you know how much of a basketball junkie I am. I'ma just for the people at home, keep your eye out for Jabari Smith and Paulo Blanchero. If I'm saying the name right, I think I got it this time.
Mm-hmm.
I just yes, please watch. Clark, I know you love college basketball too. Just I'm just telling the people at home, please watch this season. It's good. I mean, the not having the tournament 2 years ago has really wore on me as a big hoop fan, and I'm so happy that it's back in full effect. And it's been an amazing season. So I just want to leave people with that. Outside of that, Clark, I think it's time to sign off. It's been a great show. We'll holler at the people next week. Like you said, don't forget to hit us up. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. You can literally just search AKA Sports. Hit us up. Tell us how we're doing. Tell us what you like and dislike. And like Clark told us before, man, give us some topics. Let us know what you want us to talk about, argue about, discuss about. Let us know. We got something in store for you. Just look out.
Agreed. And if you want to start watching college basketball, a great game on right now, number three UCLA versus number seven Arizona. So if you want to watch a good game, turn that on now. For us,
Absolutely.
we're definitely gonna go watch this game, but first we gotta sign off. So for Fletch, my name is Clark Heron, aka the Hairy Hobo, and we're out.
Peace.